Welcome back to the deep dive. The stack of sources we're looking at today is, well, it's deceptive. I think that's the only word for it.
Deceptive is the perfect word, yeah.
Because if you just looked at the physical objects we're analyzing, I mean, the photocopies, the transcripts, the scans from the archives, it all looks incredibly boring.
It does.
It's the kind of stuff you'd probably shred without even thinking about it.
It really is. It's the kind of paperwork that makes up the background noise of history. You've got trade figures, routine correspondence, administrative summaries. It's just beige.
Okay, let's just unpack that visual for a second, because I think it's crucial for you, the listener, to really picture this. Imagine a file, a beige, completely nondescript folder sitting in some dusty archive somewhere.
Right.
It doesn't have a big red top secret stamp on the cover. There's no skull and crossbones. It doesn't announce itself at all.
It's designed not to be noticed. It's camouflage. If you were just flipping through a stack of papers, you'd go right past it.
And inside, you've got a date, 2 signatures, and some very, very dry text. It's sitting right there, sandwiched between, I don't know, a report on timber exports and a diplomatic note about visa applications. Just sitting there.
And yet, that file is probably one of the most explosive documents of the entire 20th century.
Exactly. This boring document, it officially didn't exist for 50 years, 5 decades. And yet, the words on those pages, they reshaped a continent.
Oh, absolutely. They moved borders, they dissolved governments.
It changed the lives of millions and millions of people.
It really challenges our whole idea of what a historical turning point looks like. We expect fireworks.
We expect speeches on balconies.
Right.
Yes.
We don't expect a quiet memo filed under miscellaneous.
So today, our mission is to unpack the secret protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. We're going to look at how the world was divided by this secret attachment, why it was denied for so long, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, what the administrative tone of the document tells us about the banality of these massive events.
And I think it's important to say, we aren't just looking at the war. We're looking at the silence. That 50-year gap between the deed and the actual admission.
So let's set the scene first.
Yeah.
August 1939, Moscow. The world is just holding its breath.
Yeah.
What's the vibe on the ground?
It's the summer before the storm. I mean, everyone in Europe knows that war is likely. The First World War left a lot of unfinished business. But the big question keeping everyone up at night in London, Paris, Berlin is who aligns with whom?
The alliances are everything.
Exactly. And then completely out of nowhere shock.
Absolute shock.
The Soviet Union and Nazi Germany announce a non-aggression pact.
And we have to stress just how weird this was. These two hated each other. This isn't just a we don't get along situation. This is like oil and water, fire and ice.
Hate is an understatement. Their entire ideologies were built on destroying the other. Fascism versus communism. I mean, Hitler had built his entire political brand on being the anti-Bolshevik.
Right. And Stalin justified his rule as the bulwark against fascism. They'd spent the last decade basically screaming at each other in the press.
So when they suddenly shake hands, the world must have just been spinning. It's like, I don't know, imagine if the two biggest rivals in sports, who've been brawling in the parking lot for 10 years, suddenly announced they were merging teams.
The cognitive dissonance was off the charts.
It was. And the public reporting at the time, it really reflects that confusion. Newspapers treated it as a temporary diplomatic maneuver. They thought, okay, this is just a pause, a tactical timeout.
The press briefings were short. The language was very restrained. It was sold as a peace deal.
A standard, if very surprising, promised not to attack each other for 10 years.
But that was the lie. Or, well, at least it was only half the truth. Because while all the cameras were focused on the public signing, the champagne, the smiles, there was an attachment to the agreement. A little sidecar.
The secret protocol.
And this is the missing piece. This is what wasn't in the newspapers. It wasn't discussed in any parliaments. It wasn't in the published text. It was classified the moment the ink was dry.
And then it was just denied.
So let's open this ghost document up. What was actually in this secret attachment?
It was basically a map.
Yeah.
Or maybe a set of instructions for a map. It divided huge parts of Eastern Europe into spheres of influence.
Spheres of influence. I always find that phrase so sterile. It feels so academic.
It's meant to be. It sounds like physics or geometry, but what it meant in practice was that entire countries were being assigned to one power or the other. It's like mafia logic. I take the north side of town, you take the south side.
So which countries are we talking about here?
Poland is the big one, of course,
Yeah.
but also the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and parts of Romania.
And the method. How did they decide who got what?
This source material is very clear about this. They used straight lines on a map.
Straight lines. You know, when I hear that, I just picture two men in a dimly lit room, literally using a ruler and a pencil to slice up a continent.
And that's pretty much what happened. Ribbentrop and Molotov, with Stalin looking on, literally drew lines across the map of Eastern Europe. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, just think about the arrogance of that.
Well, who was in the room representing Poland?
No one.
The Baltics.
No one. No representatives from any of those countries were present. They weren't asked. They weren't even informed. Their entire fate was decided in a secret meeting between two foreign powers.
It's treating whole nations like property, like they're just trading baseball cards. I'll give you Lithuania if you give me half of Poland.
And what really stands out to me reading the actual source text is the language. If you didn't know the context and you just read the words, you wouldn't think it was a plan for conquest.
It didn't sound evil.
Not at all. It didn't order any violence. It didn't describe military action. It didn't say bomb these cities or arrest these people. It didn't mention civilians at all.
It just categorized them.
Precisely. It simply stated who would control what once events unfolded. The tone was calm, almost detached. It used phrases like territorial and political rearrangement.
That word detached, that really sticks with me. It didn't read like a crime, it read like planning.
And that is the terrifying part of bureaucracy, isn't it? When you write it down in that passive administrative voice, you strip the humanity out of it. It becomes a logic problem, not a moral one. It allowed the men in that room to separate themselves from the blood that was about to be spilled.
So they have this plan, the map is drawn,
Yes.
The ruler has done its work. Now we move from ink to reality. Because just 1 week later, the world changes.
1 week after the signing, September 1st, 1939, Germany invades Poland from the west.
And this is the date everyone learns in school, the start of World War II.
Right. But then, 16 days later,
September 17th.
Soviet forces enter from the east.
Now, imagine you're a journalist in 1939. You see the Germans coming from one side, the Soviets from the other. You know these two nations are ideological enemies. You expect a collision. You expect the biggest battle in history.
But they don't fight.
They stop.
They meet in the middle, near Brest-Litovsk, and they just stop. They shake hands, they smoke cigarettes together.
And the line where they stop.
It was the exact line drawn in the secret protocol.
That is the smoking gun right there.
Yeah.
That's the moment where the whole coincidence theory just dies. If they were truly surprised by each other, they would have been shooting.
You would think so. But the official silence was incredibly disciplined. Despite the obvious coordination on the map, official statements never once referred to it.
So how did they explain it? I mean, how do you explain two enemy armies meeting and hugging?
Separately, and with different lies. Germany said they were securing their border against Polish aggression. The Soviets said the Polish state had ceased to exist and they were entering to protect Ukrainian and Belarusian minorities.
So they acted like strangers who just happened to bump into each other while doing separate errands.
Exactly. And the document, the script they were both following.
Unmentioned.
It was the invisible conductor of the orchestra.
Let's talk about the consequences on the ground. Because for the people living in those spheres of influence, this wasn't an administrative exercise. This was life and death.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, take the Baltic states. In the months following the pact, the Soviet Union moved in. But because of the protocol, because of this legal framework they had invented, they didn't call it an invasion.
What did they call it?
Legal transitions, mutual assistance. Governments were dissolved, borders were redrawn, mass deportations began, people being sent to Siberia in cattle cars. But in the official records, this was all just procedure.
The bureaucratic mask.
Yes. And the agreement enabling all of it was never cited. They created a kind of phantom legality to cover a very real crime.
And this brings us to the next chapter of the story, which I find even more baffling, really. The erasure. We move into the Cold War.
The war is over. Germany is defeated. The alliance is dead.
And usually, this is when the truth comes out, right? The Nazis are on trial at Nuremberg. The archives are busted wide open. But here, the silence around the Soviet side actually got louder.
It became a policy of denial. The agreement became politically inconvenient for the Soviet Union.
Why? I mean, they won the war. Why hide the beginning of it?
Because the Soviet Union's entire post-war legitimacy was built on being the great anti-fascist power, the great patriotic war. If you admit that you started the war as Hitler's partner, that you carved up Europe with him, Well, the moral foundation of the state cracks.
So they just lied.
They lied aggressively, they acknowledged the public pact, they couldn't hide that, but they vehemently denied the secret terms. For decades, Soviet textbooks described the invasion of Eastern Europe purely as a defensive necessity.
So if you asked a Soviet diplomat about the secret protocol in, say, 1960 or 1970,
They would look you right in the eye and say it was a Western fabrication.
just gaslighting history.
But here's the thing that raises a really important point about the West. Because we like to think of this as just a Soviet lie. But Western governments had copies of this protocol.
Wait, hold on. They had it.
Oh, yes. They found copies in the German Foreign Office archives after the war. The microfilm was there, the US had it, the UK had it.
So why didn't they scream it from the rooftops? Why wasn't it on the front page of every newspaper? Look at what Stalin did.
Well, they didn't publish them immediately, they kept them in archives.
Why?
Realpolitik, complicity, fear of rocking the boat. Think about 1945, you're trying to rebuild Europe, you're negotiating the UN Charter. Do you really want to humiliate the massive superpower sitting in the other chair?
So the truth was basically traded for stability.
Sometimes preserving the status quo is more important to diplomats than revealing the truth. The document stayed in the dark, it became an open secret among historians, but it wasn't official reality.
That is just so frustrating. I feel like the truth was held hostage by everyone.
And the journalists who tried to find it, they just ran into a brick wall. When they asked questions, they were met with deflections. The papers were called unverified, or questions were just flat out ignored.
The silence became policy.
Exactly. No investigations, no clarifications, just a blank face.
But the truth has a way of leaking out, doesn't it? It survives in the cracks. You can't hide an entire continent's trauma forever.
It does. The protocol survived in fragments. You had the microfilm copies in the West, you had copies in foreign archives that weren't as locked down, and you had personal notes from defecting diplomats who said, I was there, I saw it.
But the Soviet government just kept saying no.
And strangely, the absence of the document became part of the historical record itself. The fact that it was missing became the story.
Until 1989.
The year everything changed.
The Soviet Union is on the brink of collapse. Glasnost openness is the new policy. And there were huge protests in the Baltics.
Massive protests. The Baltic Way. 2 million people holding hands across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And they are demanding one specific thing.
The truth about the pact. They're not just asking for freedom. They're asking for the receipts.
Exactly. They argued that their nations were stolen by a criminal conspiracy. If the secret protocol is real, their annexation is illegal.
And finally, under all that political pressure, the Soviet Congress cracks.
They admit the document exists. A special commission confirms its authenticity.
After 50 years of calling it a fabrication. After telling people for 50 years that they were crazy for believing it.
It was a massive moment.
So, was there a big apology? Did they say, we were wrong, we were so sorry for the pain we caused, let's make this right?
No. That's the bitter part of the ending. The acknowledgement was brief.
Brief.
And technical. They described the protocol as legally flawed.
Legally flawed. That sounds like a parking ticket.
And then they just left it unexplained.
That is so unsatisfying.
It is. There was no detailed review of the consequences, no formal accounting of the decisions made in that room in Moscow, and no memorial to mark the moment.
It was published quietly.
Very quietly. It was an admission forced by necessity, not by conscience. They basically said, okay, fine, it exists. But it was a mistake by the previous management.
So where does that leave us today? How do we remember this?
Well, often we don't. It's taught as a footnote, a strange diplomatic episode, a prelude to war.
Right, we focus on the battles, the tanks, the soldiers. We watch movies about D-Day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We rarely examine the language of the document itself. We rarely discuss that administrative tone.
And that's what I really want to leave our listeners with.
Yeah.
The core takeaway of this deep dive.
Go on.
The most unsettling part of this entire story isn't what the document said. It's how easily it was removed from the public record.
It was officially invisible for 50 years.
Millions of people lived their entire lives under consequences, borders, laws, nationalities that were shaped by an agreement they were told didn't exist.
And the reason it was so easy to hide, it wasn't because it looked like a monster, it was because it looked like paperwork.
It was ordinary.
It didn't read like a crime, it read like planning.
And that banality is what made it so easy to deny. You can hide a memo much easier than you can hide a tank. You can lose a file in an archive much easier than you can lose an entire army.
The file itself, it just ends without commentary. There's no conclusion, no explanation, just a record of what was agreed. And a long, long silence afterwards.
And that silence remains part of the document, doesn't it? It's almost as loud as the words themselves.
It does. It reminds us that history isn't just what happens, it's what gets recorded, and just as importantly, what gets hidden.
So here's the provocative thought for you to take away. We look back at 1939 and we think, how crazy that they hid that. We think we're smarter now, more transparent.
But are we?
Think about all the ordinary files crossing desks today.
The trade figures, the diplomatic notes, the algorithmic safety protocols.
If a document that reshaped a continent could remain invisible for half a century just because it looked boring, what are we signing today that we won't know about for another 50 years?
What is the secret protocol of our time?
That's a question I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. Thank you for listening to The Deep Dive.
Thank you.